Good evening. How are you doing? Well, the sun is out. It was about 100 at the high point today. It's about in the 80s now, and there's a great soft wind. I could just smell salt, and I think I was at the beach if I closed my eyes. So it's the evening is a gift, unlike the day, which was as oppressive as you can imagine. After I spoke yesterday, one of our Twitter friends, Cindy Walker, wrote in response that what is it about people who want to make their own rules and regulations and defy the norm? And she said that they must be self-righteous and arrogant. I couldn't agree more. I absolutely agree. And I don't know if you've heard of a project called Project 65, and I don't know how their results are going. But the 65 refers to lawyers going into court, and in 65 different cases, the complaints they made that the election was a fraud were thrown out. And so they're focusing on these lawyers to see what's an appropriate accounting for their conduct in those proceedings. Basically, I suppose the worst case example, and I don't know each of the 65, but we do know some of them, and statements were made that were absolutely false about what was going on in an election. So this would be a good example of my objection and Cindy's objection to doing business that way. And these guys seek to have these bad lawyers basically held accountable and punished for what they did. And I think that's a good thing. But the rest of it is we have to bear down on these criminal cases. And I don't know if you notice it or not, but people who were the apologists for the Justice Department every once in a while throw in the fact and say, yeah, people just weren't patient, they were working all along. That is bullshit. That is absolute total bullshit. And so when they start making these kinds of noises again about what can we do, he was nominated or something, keep your powder dry, because we're going to have another fight when, and we'll probably be helping Jack Smith, because the sense I get is that he wants to go the distance. I could have been a contender. He wants to win this, and that's the kind of prosecutor we need, and I'm hoping I'm right about that. But so far, it's looking good, and I'm very hopeful. But he's not going to do it without opposition. The Justice Department is a difficult place. That's why the Southern District of New York, where I was, has a reputation of being the sovereign district of New York, because it went its own way on some difficult cases to the chagrin of those in the Justice Department. So don't think for a minute that the Justice Department has been entirely reformed. Jack Smith is in a special position, and he seems to be using it well, and so far nobody's tripping him up. But he got a late start because the inert Attorney General didn't do anything until we pushed, and the January 6th committee pushed. And we have to keep pushing to keep these guys honest and to protect Jack Smith if he continues as he is to be a sincere prosecutor who cares that these people be held accountable for what they did. In the category of government not serving the people, it's always troubled me about Medicaid. It's often too little, it's too late, and states do everything they can to avoid the responsibility. Yet they'll go out on the hustings, in an election year, and they'll say, hey, we're there for you, we're going to help you, and so forth. So let's visit Arkansas for a few minutes. Kristen Fortner has been on Medicaid. They have serious problems. She has medicine that's a prescription that's pretty expensive, $350 a month. And she got a notice from Arkansas saying, you've got to notify Human Services that you're still eligible. And she filled out the papers and went out within days of receiving this notice. Then time passed. She gets another notice saying, oh, we're going to have to kick you off because you haven't filed anything. So she filed it again, and then she gets a notice that she was kicked off. What do you think is the chance that they got the papers and that this is another way to reduce their responsibility to Medicaid? And just so you have some idea of people in real trouble who qualify for Medicaid, she gets paid $3 an hour working in restaurants plus whatever tips she can get. How far could you go on that? It's a pretty terrible situation. And we may ask how she's employed and they can get away with paying her $3 an hour. But those are the facts, and that's what our country is doing to our people in places like Arkansas. And if the Trump folk are elected, that's going to happen across the nation. Because they'll say, you make a bargain for whatever you want. The invisible hand of competition will take care of you. Yeah, well, first of all, it's not free competition. We know that. Anybody over 10 knows that. And the people who get it are not the people who do the work. And that's got to change. It just has to change. It can't exist. And finally, let's finish up with our favorite, well, we have a couple. One of our favorite Supreme Court justices, Alito. Alito basically says, hey, Congress, you can't force me to be ethical. You can't force upon me rules about how ethical I should be. So go pound stand. Now, of course, he didn't say it exactly the way I did, but that was the spirit of it. The same spirit that had him overrule a decision that was 50 years old, Roe v. Wade. The same guy who gets the benefits of his associates while on the court. And basically what he's saying, he's not even saying it as an academic question that I don't think there should be ethics, just trust us. He's saying, I don't want there to be ethical requirements because it apply to me. That's what he's doing. That's no way to make law. But he says Congress has no authority. Well, since 1789, there's been a Judiciary Act revised from time to time, which has to do with first creating in 1789 the Supreme Court. And then we have to remember that these are co-equal branches, but they're also supposed to be checks and balances on each other. And so there are powers by which they interact. And it's kind of interesting to consider the difficult issue of how they should interact, particularly when we don't have honest brokers in either chamber right now, either the Judiciary Chamber or in the Congress. And this sort of underscores how you can have the best device in the world, but if all of a sudden people throw up their arms and say, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to pay respect, I'm not going to deal with that. This is, I'm giving tribute to Cindy Walker because she and I agree perfectly on this. And I'm sure a lot of you out there do as well. That how can the Supreme Court expect to have our trust in their decisions when they won't take steps to assure us they're going to act ethically, going to act legally themselves, that they're going to make us proud by being, as the judges of old, repositories of wisdom, insight, helping our large community, which is strained by some very difficult issues right now and divisions created by Trump and others. And so what would they do? Take down the court if they could. That's certainly the way it appears. And that's just not acceptable. We can't have that. There are a couple other things going on. How about Tuberville? He's the one who's holding up what we should do about our defense. Because he's just that kind of a guy, Tommy Tuberville. So how high is his intelligence? How high is the sky? How low is his ethics? How low is his responsibility to our national defense? How low is this man to be in the chambers and to have anything to say about our national defense? We have to get rid of these people. These people on so many levels are compromising our nature, and it will affect us. The punch is coming. The punch is coming in which it will hit us square in the jaw. It won't be a sucker punch because we've seen it coming. And if we don't stop these guys, they're going to do it. We've heard, if not seen, the reaction of people last night when one of the presidential candidates in the Republican Party in Iowa said, "You can't go with Trump. He's going to take us all down." And they booed him. What kind of person wants a person who has committed these crimes, challenged our nation, compromised our possibilities to be the president of the United States when he betrayed the office when he was there and betrayed the nation when he tried to prevent himself from being removed from office? Impossible. Absolutely. Now, DeSantis, he's out there and he's trying to unconceal the charisma that is barely evident in his public life. And I happened to see a clip in which he was talking to somebody at the Iowa event, and he looked so uncomfortable to me. I don't know how you could be in politics all these years, be at all these public functions, and to be misplaced, meaning you don't know how to interact with people. Why? Because you're busy trying to manipulate them. You know, he laughed too much. He threw his head back. You know, Ari is on his show made fun of some politicians that seem to have, and some hosts, by the way, who have a phony laugh that from time to time they invoke. I guess when there's nothing else between their ears except the numbing sense that they don't have a clue what to talk about. So finally, transplants. And I'm not talking about what we do in government. I know something about it because of Holly, of course. And I do know it's a difficult system. And one of the things they're upset about is that at one point, 21% of kidneys that they had possession of went unused. Now let's stop the music here. First of all, to give you some idea, when Holly was on the transplant list, we were only on it a day, which was, I think, very lucky, because I don't think if she'd gotten weaker as time went on, and months or a year later, I don't know she would have had the strength to deal with this very difficult operation. But you have to match up who is going to receive the transplant, whatever it is, all manner of things. Blood type, positive or negative. The fact that Holly was AB gave her a chance, but she was AB negative. And the donor, the transplant donor was AB positive, and that matters. And the only other thing we know is that the donor was 14 years old. But any person can have all sorts of things inside their system. So you don't just have a lung or a kidney. What you have is you have a person's resume in the molecules of the organ that's going to be transplanted. And it's at a geographic location, somewhat distant, oftentimes, from where the person is who could receive the transplant. And there's timing involved. And there's a whole number of issues that are not easy issues. And then there are expenses. And then it has to be on a plane and packed in ice and everything else. In Holly's case, I actually, because of the doctor who'd done 100 of these, in this case we're talking about lung transplants, he sent me a picture showing Holly's old lungs pulsing, and they looked beaten up. And the operation was 8 hours. And the patient has to go through all manner of testing because they have to do two things. They have to see what are the possible exposures in the donor, and they have to see what are the limitations physically in the person who would receive it. And these are not simple calculations. And there's no way to force the result because you don't know when a person is going to die. And you have to examine the danger to them. And then you have to match up the two together. So I get concerned when Congress is getting involved in something when they know so little about medicine to begin with, the way they do these things. And I think of pain patients, I think of this subject, I think of all the things that people who don't know pretend to know and act upon because they just want to be in charge and they're going to show us how to do it. In my mind is also a criminal case I have. I'm going to be in court this Tuesday. And so I'm thinking about these representations that the government makes in cases. And I find they're wanting. There's no humility. There's only, this area of public life, it's not about winning. It's about doing the right thing. And I luckily had that experience, not in these kinds of cases that we're talking about, transplants, but in the Southern District of New York, when people came in, and for example, the obvious one, they had evidence of innocence, we looked at it because doing the right thing was the objective. That was then. I don't believe it's true now. I don't believe it's true among prosecutors. I don't believe it's true among the other branches of government. And one of the reasons is because of Trump and of the vectors going in that wrong-headed direction for so long and letting those 2 years go by when people could have been held accountable, reassuring the people that you can trust in the government, that people are not going to defy our laws and rules, our historical precedents. They're going to be working for us, all of us, and that hadn't happened, and so we're all at risk because of it. So we're in a good position because the vectors are going in the right direction, but we just have to keep our foot on the pedal to keep it going forward. So that's, sorry if I was too serious this evening or not, but those are the thoughts I have today, and I hope you're well. And I apologize to you, Cindy, for referencing your thoughts, but you were spot on, and I think it's true for all of us. We're asking, who are these people who would upend law and order? The people who used to say they were for law and order. Plainly, between the deed and what they say, there's a huge abyss, and we have to correct that. And we can correct that by making sure these kinds of people are not running our government and not making our policy and not doing to this nation what should happen to no democracy on earth. So, good evening from the Cathedral of Trees, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.